Good evening, everyone. This is Ari Kopel with Shattering the Matrix. Tonight, my guest is Eve Lorgen for part two of the Alien Manipulation series. And as a quick refresher for anyone who still may not know about Eve, she authored The Love Bite, Alien Interference of Human Love Relationships. She also authored The Dark Side of Cupid and is a contributing author to all three volumes of The Universal Seduction by Angelica Tepestra. Eve is a dedicated counseling and hypnotherapy professional and anomalous trauma researcher, and she's worked with alien abductees, MILABs, and mind control victims while earning her master's degree in counseling psychology back in 1992. So, Eve, welcome back. I know we have a lot to cover tonight. How are you?
Yes, I'm good, and there's always more to share that actually we learned since the last time. So it'll be a good show to
It will
just kind of,
be.
yeah.
Definitely, definitely.
So
I wanted to start off with Ted Rice because I know that you recently found out that he is still alive and sharing information about all these things, right? And you had thought that maybe he had passed a long time ago. So can you share more about who Ted Rice is and why he's relevant right now?
okay, great. Well, Ted Rice is a main um, alien abductee who did many hypnotic regressions and research into his own experiences as the writing here. I'll just show you the book. The book is called Masquerade of Angels by the late Dr. Karla Turner. And so this one really details his life and abduction history and what was discovered through many hypnotic regressions and inquiries into his experiences with Barbara Bartholic as the hypnotic regression researcher, along with Dr. Karla Turner, who actually wrote the book. And she was the one who wrote three books relatively in close sequence in timing in the mid to late 1990s. And she wrote a book called Into the Fringe, which was her own
Right?
experience in her family, Masquerade of Angels, which is the Ted Rice case, which is phenomenal, and also Taken, I believe, about 5 case histories of abductee MILABs and the kinds of experiences they have. And so that really launched a new level of increased understanding that wasn't part of the norm of the bell curve of the current alien abduction UFO research community at the time. And it was her work that actually inspired me and James Bartley and other people to begin a support group and our own research, investigations, and our own experiences while we were corresponding with Barbara Bartholic and, learning and interviewing people on our own.
Okay.
So, of course, the understanding Ted Rice's experience within that book is a very detailed alien love bite experience, which we might have mentioned it last time. It's basically how the ETs who are taking him have orchestrated and set him up with another woman who was also an abductee, about the same age as he was, I think, several times throughout his life. And then later in adulthood, a very strong obsession right after the bonding, which is detailed in the book, a big amount of detail that many others never got to. And I attribute it to not only Barbara Bartholik's good research and Dr. Karla Turner's, but also Ted Rice himself was someone who's he's very psychically gifted and perceptive as an individual. He actually started out, we could launch into actually some of the reasons why his case and his story is so important. Of
Absolutely.
course, he's 81 today,
Amazing.
and it's such a blessing that he's still alive. And apparently the story was that after Dr. Karla Turner died, which was really a suspected murder,
Mm.
which we know now, that he and his family were being kind of threatened and harassed and targeted in different ways, and he just didn't feel safe to just be out in the public domain until relatively recently, I think. So he actually appears on another show with an Irishman named Stuart Eglinton on a show called Alien Talk.
Okay.
And so I was on one of his shows yesterday, and then he told me about other shows that he had done with clients that I wrote about in my book that were Barbie's clients. Because after Barbie died, I still had some of her cases that she gave me that I put in my Dark Side of Cupid book.
Wow.
So it was just amazing how so much had just come together in the past week.
Mm-hmm.
So, and actually, I got the Masquerade of Angels from a gentleman who has his own show who gave this to me. It was his copy because I lost my copy. And so, and I might just launch off on this, but maybe not. But in the Masquerade of Angels, there was a very key experience that Dr. Karla Turner talked about on many of her lectures that are in videos, even online now. But it was an experience that Ted Rice witnessed along with two other women that he visited in another state. It was kind of like before the time he did a lot of his regressions and found out more about his alien abductions. But then there was other females that he visited in another state because he would do psychic readings at bookstores and be involved with like light worker healing communities. Okay, which is that's a whole other story with what the spirit guys tell you to do. And
Exactly.
they always deviate you from the whole alien abduction issue, who these beings really are. They just kind of skirt you around these things, and then oh my god, I mean, I could just go off on so many tangents because it's so clear now, what 20 something years later,
Yeah,
the modus operandi in which these beings operate within primarily the new age community, but they can operate in many other ways and other groups as well.
exactly.
But one of the key things I wanted to mention, because I had shared with you privately the interview of Dr. Anna Milhasea, who is the doctor, and I don't know, she probably does microscopy and biochemical analysis of blood and
Yep.
what's in the blood from the recent poisons being introduced
Mm-hmm.
in our bodies that create these self-assembling nanotech fibers and unnatural shapes in the blood that emit light also. And a lot of the light that is emitted, because I've seen it in some of these microscopy slides and pictures. I haven't spoken with her, but it's a lot of it is blue light or different fluorescent kinds of emanations from unnatural shapes that are, in the blood. So it was her experience that was like the NDE from being poisoned and harassed because of what she's revealing, right? So she's a targeted individual on top of being poisoned and made sick, very ill. But, and I guess I didn't understand this clearly, but in her experience, and I don't know who is the man who interviewed her, but it was detailing basically what had happened and why she was kind of out of the scene for a while because she was recovering her health from even like near brain damage from the severe poisoning of whatever was put in her body to try to kill her. So
I
she had
wasn't even aware of that. I mean, I follow her. Yeah.
amazing. So she did get ill with something that was like similar to the white lung issue, difficulty breathing.
Wow.
Then what is the cause of that? I'm not even going to talk about that because I don't want us to get deep,
Mm-hmm.
call it. But her experience, because I didn't understand it clearly until Lalita Karoli did a video on her testimony by reiterating certain points that showed similarities with what we're calling in my lab and alien abduction experiences and literature. We have what would be called stage managed dreams, sleep paralysis, and
Mm-hmm.
then abduction kinds of experiences in a lucid dream state, sometimes where you feel physical pain, but your body is paralyzed. You might be able to move your eyes and breathe, but you can't fight back, or you're pulled out of the body. But there's actually a technology that can do this. And this was something that was actually talked about years ago in the Masquerade of Angels book, more from a observation by two witnesses where there was three people present in one bedroom where there was an abduction kind of event taking place.
Wow.
And so it was Ted Rice who also observed the experience, two female friends named Amelia and Maria. Okay. So, and I don't even know if they knew the whole thing about abductions. They were still in the process of just trying to figure all this stuff out. So, apparently, when he visited them in another state, the two women shared a bedroom while he had another bedroom. And that in the middle of the night, one of the women named Maria was having an experience where a blue beam of light came and came basically through the ceiling
Mm-hmm.
and hit her. And I don't know if it was like a cylindrical light or it just kind of went over her body. And then when she was in that light beam, like her roommate was still kind of asleep and like woke up when she started like sensing something weird going on. And so she's basically not able to really move her body. So she's paralyzed by this blue light,
Right.
able to a little bit speak about what she was seeing and hearing. So she was hearing helicopters, like military helicopters overhead, and some voice telling her something. And she was seeing it as if she was seeing through the roof, like as if the roof wasn't there. And that's actually a common experience in abductions where
Mm-hmm.
they take you and it's like, oh, the walls disappear. You could see right through your ceiling, or you could see through the walls of the craft, like they just disappear and you like float through it. So that happened during this blue beam of light. But apparently, the other woman who was observing, and when Ted came in, because like, what's the commotion? She was like screaming,
Right.
"It's like aliens here." And they were like, I don't see any aliens. I don't see these beings at the foot of your bed. But Maria, who was,
Oof.
having a light
Yeah.
beam over her, was seeing the beings at the end of her bed and helicopters, going on and like seeing through the roof. But it was the effect of the blue beam technology that they were using to create this experience, including the sleep paralysis and the inability to really move and get out of that. It's like a forced lucid dream kind of experience. So when I thought, wait a minute, this is like what they do in certain what we called stage managed dreams, or when they come in, you might hear a vibration. And then that vibration can cause you to become paralyzed. And then you can only move your eyes. And then you start seeing through like a third eye overlay of perception that's within this abduction or visitation experience.
Mm-hmm.
So what was interesting is like, wait a minute, if I remember correctly, when Lalita Karoli was describing Dr. Anna's experience of apparently she was having a dream during sleep paralysis that was a horrific NDE, where she was like stabbed in blood and like almost like a ritual death, and then perceiving this red dragon being who was basically this head archontic demiurge like being who was controlling the artificial intelligence that's basically responsible for manipulating humanity and her own experience of the threat for what she was doing. And she came out of it victorious with a sense of mission and recovery by like a angelic healing.
Wow.
What's interesting is that, and I think Lalita brought this up, that, we're seeing these structures inside the blood and inside the body that come through perhaps many different sources of entry into the human body and blood. And, we can talk about what chemtrails were the food, or what's, injected in the body through certain recent medical treatments.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, these things are found in the blood and they could be seen microscopy in slides, but they also emit light and they self-assemble into structures that have a function. And some of those structures now, I believe, when I saw some of the light emitting particles and what it's doing with these fluorescent biophotonic conversion or whatever it's doing, I think it's creating the same blue beamish technology, except it's happening internally. So it affects
Ooh.
the same perceptual experience of, let's say, a stage managed dream,
Wow.
paralysis of some sort. So I'm thinking that it's like an overlay, but it's actually happening within us. And that alien abductees, quote, in my labs have been subject to this kind of experimentation and abuse and whatever they're doing for years, and
Mm-hmm.
just really even know what was happening. And so I think they're introducing this in larger entry points into the human biology, so that the same kind of thing can be done to change us, which kind of goes into the some of the ideas I wanted to bring forth
Yep.
from a therapeutic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So when I work with people who've had trauma, and especially anomalous stuff, but it doesn't have to be, quote, alien or the weird MyLabby stuff. It could be just, a family system where you had narcissistic abuse or alcoholic parent or sexual abuse or whatever. But that trauma can cause dissociation and personality reactivity styles that make it hard for them to have basically successful relationships in life. And they, because that's what trauma does. It
Yep.
creates this trauma, how shall I say it? It's a survival mechanism, how our personality is shaped early in life to basically survive what would ordinarily be, it would kill your body or it would cause you to become insane and not be able to survive mentally. So that's why dissociation takes place and why we have these trauma coping mechanisms.
Makes
So,
sense.
but in recovery, like what we learn is like, wow, it's a bummer, but if you've had a history like this and didn't do the, people call it shadow work, but it's much more than that. It's really, doing the therapy, doing the emotional processing, the self inquiry, the self reflection, the realization of your own beliefs and emotions from early traumas and maybe amnesiac memories that come back. And it's really rebuilding your original identity, your original awareness based on truth of whatever that situation was, and then rebuilding on top of or eliminating the false identity, the beliefs and coping mechanisms that no longer work. And so there is actually a process of rebuilding true identity. So in my work now, what I feel is the most important for people is to not only be able to get through these traumas and have a functional life, but to actually get to the truth of their original identity and authentic being that is actually connected to our heart and the spirit of truth and our eternal spirit.
There you go.
So, and then this is where we come into some deviated roadblocks with mind control programming, spiritual deception,
Hmm.
and, for example, narcissistic abuse and gaslighting, but on a large scale
Yeah,
or individually. And so this is where it's like, whoa, we start seeing some of these same patterns over and over again that maybe when someone gets to a certain point in their discovery that they know something weird's going on in their life with this
hmm,
MyLabby or secret space program or abductions or false twin flame crap, or, you might get to a point where you get to that impasse of, these patterns won't stop, they just can't get past a certain point. And so that's where we have to take a look at, what's creating this impasse to the true discovery and rebirthing of our original identity and awareness.
exactly.
So, and I think
Interesting.
this is something that Ted and I and who people he has interviewed on this particular show, he's actually has the perception, being someone who's been through this for so long, to see, oh, well, this is the same thing that I went through, and this is what they're doing, and bringing forth the question of, this is what the alien beings are doing. Let's say in the alien love bite experience, and it was in Ted's experience was in my love bite book,
Okay.
but it's also in the Masquerade of Angels, where it's like his whole life basically.
Wow.
And then you could see, the how things work within the overall orchestration and manipulation of a particular life, even from early childhood, that sets them up in a certain way in a family system, to meet someone later and to go through all these emotional, it's a lot of emotional suffering and pain through a dysfunctional obsession that brings forth a, let's say, I don't want to call it sick, but it's an unhealthy form of love, connection, and obsession with someone else.
Hmm.
Brings forth like the yearning and the unconsummated love and the chaos and the, running after this dangling carrot that never is consummated, in this, chaotic, dysfunctional, narcissistic, codependent kind of thing, or whatever it is. It's as if the aliens will engineer the things that they don't work out right. And in other words, they create a lot of dysfunction and chaos to feed off the emotional energy.
Gotcha.
So we knew that, though. We kind of
Yeah.
it was an emotional harvesting game. So
So what is the function of this? I mean, obviously, I hear you that you're saying it's for, feeding off of that emotional, that negative, constant suffering, right? But that's one person. Then, you might have maybe, I don't know, how many people do you think are might be experiencing this same type of thing to make it worthwhile to say, okay, hey, we've got a harvest going. That's let's focus on Earth because we're going to be able to harvest the human emotion for our own feeding, our own purpose. I mean, really, I mean, how many people are we talking about that this is happening to? Do you have a number?
It's probably a lot more than what we think. I mean, in the
Mhm.
90s, I think there was some study, it was the Roper poll, and it was just anomalous experiences where if they asked a bunch of questions, they could assess that, a percent, like 2% of the population were having anomalous experiences that were probably like alien, ET, weird kind of experiences. But I think it's much more than that.
Mhm.
And one of the things that Ted brought up, and it reminded me of something. Well, not only do they take, let's say, they might create a lot of the tension. It's like the tension and chaos that creates a lot of the energy, but they can also want to take worship, love, and positive energy through, certain spiritual groups who give praise to certain entities or gods, and then they might be just like slurping that up,
Yep.
and they're like the lower level gods as opposed to the eternal creator of all that is. That is something that really the Gnostics tried to get when they realized, wait a minute, there's some like lower demiurgic,
Mhm.
interlopers here, and
Yep.
they're like, there's something wrong with the, this feeling, this ain't right, right?
Right.
Because you go into the deeper underbelly of some of these things, it's like, wait a minute, they shouldn't be doing that, like human blood sacrifice. No, 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 no. Right. So anyway, I don't even need to go there. Um, but one of the things that Ted mentioned, and I thought, oh yeah, that what they'll do with the energy itself, it propels and gives, it's like an energy source for their ships.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, or for the light
Holy
ship.
cow. Wow.
Yeah, and this reminded me of something, and it was in another case in Florida many years ago, and it was called the Northport Devil out of Port Charlotte, Florida, and it was a frequent sightings of orbs and quote UFO light orby things floating around and darting around, and sometimes they would blob it sometimes into different shapes instead of orbs, or they would go almost like a cross, and then they would just manifest and then like land on the ground or whatever.
Oh my goodness.
Those orbs themselves, they weren't craft, they were the actual being and the individual beings of these cloven hooved reptilian winged
Oh, lovely.
Draco reptilian type of beings who would basically land and then manifest from these orbs of light they were basically floating around in. That was like another dimensional form, and then they would be clomping around through the woods and growling and snapping branches off trees and cracking mirrors and basically carrying on with some abductions, and it almost seemed kind of threatening and creepy. So I had talked to this researcher who him and his son were having these constant encounters, and then they were trying to record these growling when they were clomping around the house, and also seeing these orbs of light floating around and playing their little games, because they know you're watching and they
Oh
might dart
yeah.
around. And so there is a phenomenon where we may not be looking at ships themselves,
Hmm.
looking at a collective of beings who are interdimensionally taking that form, or a singular being who, if they manifested, they'll come down and then show up as a particular type. And then some of the ancient traditions, and I think these came from ancient the Balkans. I don't remember because I wrote an article years ago, but it was, let's say, something light in the sky, kind of like a meteor. You know how they show like a light
Oh
with a
yeah.
streak, and then they come down, bam, and they crash, and then it's like a being comes out of the meteor. So it's like
Oh my God.
a form of travel, and then when they land, it's like one of these weird creatures.
Oh, oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, I thought about, wait a minute, there's all these other things that we may not understand
Hmm.
because they're using us as not only experimenting with different projects, which they talk about, like the alien hybrid breeding, and seeing these hybrid or humans in these tanks, like growing them up in the liquid, and different, like Dr. Karla Turner brought up the body processing plants, the underground facility
Right.
processing plants, that the aliens were working with some human military underground faction where it appeared that they're, building and creating, or I don't want to say it, limbs and body parts of
Mm-hmm.
humans, and then processing them as if they need to like create these. So that
Jeez.
was some of the things that Karla Turner talked about, because there was people in my group, me included, who were having, dreams or what are these experiences of seeing things like that in an underground basis.
Oh,
So, and not just underground, underwater.
oh wow.
And then so Ted was mentioning that yesterday, and I think it was, or it might have been another thing, but he was talking about how he had an experience where the craft didn't go up in the sky. It traveled around in order to collect people or whatever to do abductions, but it descended into the ground, and some of them descended into the ocean. So
Wow.
they ain't flying from above other planets, they're going down below, and they can go in between trees or in and out of water or come in and out of mountains as if they interdimensionally can just go through solid objects. So there's those, observations of the connections with underground, underwater,
Mm-hmm.
the humans working with the aliens, and some of the other more, unusual reports that Ted talked about. He told me to go listen to. I guess it's because when we talked about Barbara Bartholick and how I had some of her cases in my second Dark Side of Cupid book. One of them
Right.
was called I called it Mariah and the Spirit Guide, okay,
Okay.
in my book. But the real name is Mary Henry,
Okay.
okay? So he actually did a show on the Mary Henry case because he knew her when she was still alive. And they had a joint abduction experience, mutual witness testimony of what happened. And they both
Amazing.
had the same experience that was something very bizarre. And I had totally forgotten about this, and having heard things over the years with similar just weird things, and because I hadn't heard about it from many other people, I just never mentioned it.
Mm-hmm.
Just to kind of go off on the report with the Mary Henry case, I guess he had a abduction experience where he was remembering having been taken, I believe it was underground, from
Okay.
a craft that might have taken him underground, and being put on some kind of, a lot of times it's kind of like a dentist chair,
Mm-hmm.
medical kind of thing
An
strapped down.
examination type of chair.
Yeah. And then a different type of being that there's like, let's say the grays take a certain form, and they might be doing the man work of handling people after abduction or some of the medical things. And then sometimes there's other beings that are hanging out, they're in charge. You don't see as many of them. They might be wearing robes or have a different appearance, and they're like in charge of like the managing operators.
Oh my gosh.
So apparently one of the managing operators that was a higher level being, I don't know if it was in the Masquerade of Angels. It might have happened after, but he said that they had a swine face and cloven hoof feet. Okay, and they were, I don't know, as maybe as tall as humans. I don't remember the exact, and I don't know what like a pig face.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they were doing,
Huh.
and it seemed as if their demeanor towards humans, and this happens with some of the reptilian, even some of the Draco accounts, where they look at you as a source of entertainment, or creepy, let's just do this experiment, or let's just do that, and it's like cruel.
Like rats in a lab.
I mean, it's like cruel and awful, but they get a sick amusement
Mm-hmm.
out. So he was describing this experience where it was as if, he was kind of what he called paralyzed in the chair, but he could see like Mary Henry sitting next to him. She's like, "Hey, I know you," and they're doing the same thing to me. And they're seeing each other like right there. And they
Oh,
did
wow.
something where they operated on one of his feet, one foot, where it was like, well, they took the foot off, and then they took the foot, and then they're using the foot to put on one of their own beings so that they had human feet to walk around in, and got like this sense of amusement to, have human feet instead of cloven hooves. And then when he came back from the experience, apparently they put a foot back on. It wasn't the same foot,
Oh,
and it
somebody else's foot. They made a mistake. They
or it wasn't the
mislabeled.
right size, or maybe it was a cloned one, but it was like not the right size. So it was like a size bigger and it was like swollen. And like when he came back, it was like his foot was hurting and it was like, this ain't right. Now he has to wear a pair of shoes one size bigger on one foot. And the same thing happened to Mary Henry.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
and I had heard a report from someone, I don't remember who it was, but I remember they had a abduction, whatever you want to call it, dream experience where they thought that they took the arm off and severed it back on, and one where they did the finger and then
Hmm,
took it back on. So, but it
that's
was like, oh
crazy.
well, did it really happen or was this true? And we don't know because if there's medical evidence. But when Ted came back from his experiences, even as a child, and this is documented not only in my Love by book, but the Masquerade of Angels, definitely in more detail. And this was the one thing that I think threw people over the edge in the UFO alien abduction ET community, because they didn't want to know, oh my God, they're cloning people.
Oh
They're
yeah.
they made him drink a fluorescent green liquid that caused a violent vomiting and blacking out reaction of the physical body. And then that liquid somehow connected with the living soul inside of his body. And then they sacrificed the body. Okay, they killed the original body, which he
Oh
was
my.
only 10 years old. And then they transferred the consciousness from this fluorescent liquid into a black box. Okay, the transfer of consciousness technology using the black box with this whole fluorescent liquid that holds the human soul.
Hmm.
So he talked about that and how, then they transferred it to another body that was in stasis that's already cloned at the same age. So they basically switched out the original for a clone.
And what is
So
the point of this? Do you know? Any idea?
that's a good question because, he had a conversation about, the soul and the spirit and the body and the mind, and how the black box itself. See, I think like, okay, as a biochemist, I'm like, okay, how does this biophotonic fluorescent bioluminescent thing have this transdimensional quality that can link in through some kind of biophysic capacity to the human soul, the etheric body, through a physical substance, right? That then is transferred into a black box and then the black box is transferred to the clone body, and then they put the black box like on the chest, and then they give the body an electric shock that starts the heart, and then somehow it transfers in this life force soul of the original back into the clone body.
Holy moly.
So when he came back, and this was one of the things that he asked, and I think a lot of abductees, this could have happened to them, but it's so traumatic, most people don't remember. But if they come back, and of course he was a early, he was he was a kid in the 50s and 60s, so it was earlier era of
Hmm.
abductions, but the same beings are involved. So when he came back from this particular switching out procedure and the cloning, the new body, he did come home and he was like really sick for like 2 months. He couldn't go to school. And they got the childhood diseases again. Of course, nowadays they
Of
get
course.
vaccines, but in the old days, even when I was a kid, we had chicken pox, we had measles, we had whatever. And then once you had them, you didn't get them again. You were
Exactly.
immune. So he got the childhood diseases all over again, as if the new body didn't have the immunity.
Exactly. Wow.
So so I think that happens more often than not, even with some of the younger people that just don't remember,
Right.
like people today.
Right.
So that just kind of, made me wonder the nature of the soul and what
Oh yeah.
the nature of the spirit, which is the more refined, eternal, nebulous kind of quality. But the soul is more like the overlay that contains the emotions and the personality and the memories of the current incarnational body, but is very necessary to activate. You have to have that to go back into a clone body.
Oh
So,
yeah. And I'm
but I,
just wondering if that soul is now contaminated in some way by being manipulated in in that fashion, being put in a black box, being extracted by that green goo. I mean, I'm sure it's got to be affected somehow, which leads up to also, did he mention anything, or does he know anything, or even you, about black goo? I mean, and I know that's a topic. And what is it, if you know, and does this pertain to any of the conversation we're having now?
Um, and I'm not sure if the green fluorescent liquid that he swallowed that created actually, it basically kills the body, but extracts the soul essence during the death process. So you don't lose it. So it doesn't
Okay.
leave the body, right? So it
Right,
stays
right.
in the liquid and then you could extract it. But
Ooh,
I remember correctly, there was another person who was an abductee in my lab. She's older now. She might be in her 70s. But she worked with the aliens in underground base and maybe
nice.
above ground military in New Mexico. I won't say the base, but remembered working with some of that fluorescent liquid. And whether or not it was the same is unknown. But
Hmm.
what I do know is that many of the SSP people and even people like Lauda Leon have described it was a black goo that was injected in her blood from an abduction, I believe. And then she had to have a military intervention to help her from this weird stuff that was found in her blood that she thought is related to black goo. There are people from the secret space program who talk about the black goo and the AI consciousness that can overtake someone, and it may be a sophisticated form of, you know, nano tech within a medium that might have a graphene type of component, but I think it's
Good
much more
point.
than that. I think it's a type of metallic alien biological, some kind of quasi material. But from what I've heard with some of the interviewees, that I think it's James Rink has a lot of the super soldiers on his show, and some of the ones you don't hear much about who have really unusual experiences. But I've heard that there's more than the black goo. There's different colors, and they may have different qualities depending on how they use it. So I think it's a type of substance that can, have transdimensional qualities and then affect our consciousness depending on what it's used for.
Right.
So it's interesting because even when I was a biochemist, I remember working with bioluminescence and fluorescence as a detection method because single photons are quantifiable even down to a molecular level.
Hmm.
So there's ways that this works in your biochemistry to create biophotonic light even inside our bodies, which is, I think, what some of this nanotech is accessing or amplifying or doing in such a way that we're having biophotonic light of different frequencies being introduced and affecting our biochemistry.
For the
Um,
purpose of what? A false ascension?
that's a good question.
What? I
Well,
mean,
yeah, just like what Dr. Anna Milhasea
hmm.
experienced with what we're seeing. My phone is going off. I forgot to put it on silent. It's classic, right? And it's
I
going to
ca-
be a certain person. I know it's going to. Never mind. Never mind. So anyway, I believe, and this is just a speculation, that depending on the frequency emission of this biophotonic light may have a particular quality or effect inside the body. So sometimes frequency can be, we can call it a Fourier analysis from color frequency into chemical composition.
hmm.
And they do this actually with drugs so that if they could figure out, for example, a particular drug or a hormone in the brain like DMT or whatever, they could create a frequency that matches that chemical formula
Correct.
and then use that frequency as a form of application in or outside the body so that you receive it as if you had that drug.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think that some of these light technologies are doing something similar, both good and bad. Even the biowave technology, I think they call it like the X39 patch. Have
Hmm.
you heard of that?
Yeah, I have.
Where they're using some kind of light photonic emission that pulses from a patch that translates into a certain effect in the body based on the acupuncture point.
Hmm.
So I just think that, the aliens or whoever has had advanced technologies for a long time that can do things that we're only discovering now, like the med beds and the like when people are abducted, for example. I think Ted had this experience or others where you're taken and you're put on a table or something, and then they have some instrument that has a screen that when they turn on the screen or you get activated by a certain light or something, then
Right.
it shows a holographic thing of all the organs in your body and the state that they're functioning in. Like if you're sick, they could just tell by some light frequency, and then they put it on a holographic image, and then they could tell what's wrong with you,
Right. Right.
heal you based on that same technology. But
So,
yeah,
according to Ted Rice, and according to your own knowledge and experience dealing with all these MyLab cases and abduction cases, uh, these aliens that are meddling in this form, because I understand that I think he says that they might be more demonic than not.
I
What are you
think so.
what is your opinion on that? Obviously, you just said it, but I mean, does he dive more into that, or as to why he's saying that, or are they just maybe scientific? Hey, we want to explore the human body and their soul, because I've heard Bashar, and I am not a follower of any type of channeled message, because I know that these can be manipulated in a negative way. But I heard recently a podcast by what's her name? Uh, Gosh, the race car driver, Patrick, her last name. I can't remember her name. She's a race car driver, and she's has a podcast. Apparently, she's spiritually in the know, and she interviewed this guy. I can't remember his name, the one who channels Bashar. But anyway, this entity's point of view is that these aliens need to abduct humanity to create hybrids, because they need to I guess continue with their civilization. Apparently their civilization, they can't reproduce on their own, therefore, gosh, they're justified, they're justified.
That's a
Uh,
good place.
so
Justification.
yeah, so what's your take on this? I don't buy it by any means, but just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I remember Bashar because years ago when I was
Yeah,
living in San Diego County, I remember going to several channelings. Like this was long before I kind of figured out what kind of experiences I was having and what it was really about. And I kind of had early on, I mean, I mentioned this on the show yesterday. I usually don't mention it, but I was raised as a spiritualist, and to actually have kind of open arms towards this positive ET thing and look into it from that perspective. But at the same time, and this is part of the programming and the orchestration, I hope I'm not getting off the subject, but I want to make a point that in hindsight, we can see there's an orchestration where you might have all these experiences, just like Ted Rice. So he was a light worker. He did spiritual readings. He hung out with these, more the new age light worker, alternative, channeling, whatever. And they always had the narrative that, well, if aliens are visiting, they must be good. And
right,
but always, like, if you wanted to delve into it a little deeper, because he had sleep issues and there was a dichotomy with some PTSD going on. I'm like, well, if they're so positive, what is that about? Why is there this like scary kind of fear stuff going on, but you're doing this work and helping people with psychic stuff, and they say they're really good, and but there's this something's not right inside. I
right.
got to question it. But what do they do? Oh no, there's nothing wrong with it. They're all benevolent. Oh no, don't go there. No, they're really good. You should be doing this. You should be writing a book. In fact, they wanted him to write a book called The Light Worker. So they wanted to promote every single thing. But if he hadn't looked into the depth of his experiences by following the gut instinct, what his spirit was yelling at him,
Yeah.
something wrong, right? And it
Hmm.
don't feel good. It don't feel good at all. Right. And others want to gaslight the crap out of you to say, well, you must be being just a little bit negative. You're not really spiritually evolved yet. Oh, that's just being negative. No. And so he finds out the whole 9 yards after the fact.
Wow.
So it's a Shar thing to go on my own story. Years ago, I was investigating all this. I wanted to believe they were good and that I had some kind of good mission, and that maybe the beings who were taking me they were actually really benevolent, and some were good and some were bad. But how come I have all this PTSD and amnesia and like relationship problems, and like this don't add up, right? They
Right,
don't add
right.
up. But one of the things that Bashar told me, and this was within a group where it was a group, right? And I was
Uh,
asking a question. I was saying, well, I think I was abducted, you know? Yeah, I'm like, and I didn't give any details, but I knew I had experiences, but I had like blackouts. I didn't remember what happened. And then he went on to say, well, that's not exactly what happened. Let's just say you weren't abducted, but you were detained. And
Oh,
for some other purpose that maybe, is justifies this, whatever. And, dancing around it within their whatever their narrative is. And I remember I had done private readings and kind of everything was kind of gone around the what was really going on. And so I think they have their own views that tend to justify and dance around the darker issues as if it's just not okay to talk about that.
exactly.
No talk rule. And I believe that it's part of a con in some ways because it's like, if you've been sexually abused and you were sexually abused by, let's say, a church member who has a high position in the church, but they're getting away with it because
Yep.
everybody's keeping secrets. No, no, you can't talk about that. No, no, you can't talk about that. And then they shame you, right?
Yeah.
And make it like you're crazy.
Yeah.
So some of that kind of stuff I think still goes on today. And although I don't want to badmouth, Bashar and the Essassani, and because in fact, I had an encounter with a blue being who was like an Essassani
Oh,
around that same time that had done some of those channeling groups, and it was a female being who actually showed me. She actually helped me understand something about myself, but at the same time it almost felt like, was there a emotional feed going on the part of the female being who, if I could face the terror of because there was a terror of facing the alien with the black eyes,
mm,
and then once I faced it brought back a memory of a split off dissociated reaction
hmm.
from early in like infancy that had to be sequestered away and compartmentalized because the trauma was so great. And then it brought back like all this horrible grief and despair and hopelessness of, what was the original trauma of the part of me that had to let go so that the body could live, because that's
Right.
how bad it was. So this being showed me if I faced her and the memory and the emotions with it, then I was able to realize a part of myself. So there was a healing aspect to it. But at the same time, there was a whole slew of emotions and dreams that came right after that as a result of that being's interaction with me. So at the same time, sometimes I just don't know because there could be good and bad within your experience as an abductee, and not all experiences are horrible and bad, right? They're just sometimes you just don't know.
Yeah.
So
Good point. So is there a type of profile of a person that is the right type for being abducted? Um, because obviously if it's a 2% of the population, whether it's 10% of the population, it may not be all the population. So what are they looking for in terms of, type of, is it a personality type? Is it a physique that they're looking for, a lineage that they're looking for? And also, does it only happen, is it in children and then it continues all the way to through adulthood, or can it start happening to an adult like all of a sudden?
yeah, in fact, I think it can start with an adult. I knew a woman, although it depends on your memory, right? Sometimes people just don't remember.
Right.
But I remember I knew a woman from Texas who was, an active person in her career as I think she was a medical technologist, and she was going cross country from the East Coast to, I don't know, Texas or someplace. And then there was an abduction, one of those events in the car or at a hotel on the trip. And that from that point forward, she was always being abducted by, and I believe it was Greys and military. And then they kept using her in some kind of medical experimentation that involved grafting in alien gray neurological tissue right into her spine and some of her nervous system. And it was actually quite awful, but she remembered her abductions, but she became very ill and disabled.
Oh,
And she would, send I knew her from Barbara Bartholick, right? And she would send like post letters in those days of wanting to know more about this, and this is what was happening. And so we corresponded. I would send packages to her because I felt so bad for her. And when I hear of cases like this, I mean, she would get abducted on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and the military
Oh,
would,
wow.
and then they would do things, and then she'd have all this pain. And she also had a heart condition, and because she was on disability, in poverty, living in a one-room place without running water, with like in excess of 9 cats because it kept her company.
Yeah.
Her teeth. So she had like and this happened to two abductee females I knew, and I don't know what it is, but they basically lost their teeth as if like the bones like dissolved, and it was a
Mhm.
real weird thing. So she couldn't eat, and so I would send her like chocolates and soft things so that she had like something nice to eat. But she ended up dying
Oh,
because of
man.
what had happened. But it was neural grafting of alien tissue with humans, because that's what the experiments they were working on, to see how compatible the neural tissue is in a type of chimeric grafting in of the neural tissue in a human body with human and grays. So she died at age 44.
Oh
And,
my God. So I thought you were describing a like an 80 something, 90 something year
um,
old person.
and from like, I think she was abducted in her 30s. So it wasn't very long before her life and health just went to crap. And then when we would report things like this to Barbie and maybe our conferences, and then get slammed down for being negative and for lying, and there's no such thing as negative aliens, and that these big name researchers who have big mission statements, and they get very famous and whatever, who are bad mouthing these things, and these people were living in poverty in one room apartments without running water in the United States of America, and they can't even get help. And that, it just made me really angry to see the the community itself is always revolves around the popular opinion of how this narrative could be shaped towards the bell curve of how human minds and personalities can be manipulated to just kind of carry out that agenda. Even if they may know some things and they're true, they're still going to be moved in that direction and
Hmm.
shaped, and ignore the other things that can tell you a hell of a lot
Yeah.
if they could acknowledge and be present for some of these people. And I guess that's what really drove me to find out more and more about the people who were lucid enough to remember what was going on some of these deeper levels of these weird human and alien medical experimentation you know but that was just one case. So that was what I felt was an opportunistic case, where
Hmm.
someone as an adult got abducted just as an opportunistic medical kind of whatever captive,
Right.
during an adult time of her life, during a cross country thing. But
Which is
yeah, that's unusual actually.
which is kind of like, again, I'm trying to understand, right? To help maybe even the audience figure this out because, hey, am I one of those? Are you one of those? What is the stereotypical type of person that may be, you know, solicited, might be someone who is targeted to a potential abduction, whether it was, in youth as a child or now, because she was just doing her cross country type of trip.
Yeah,
And she may have been abducted as a child who, again,
yeah,
amnesia,
yeah.
or just started happening now. Are they looking for a blood type, a certain blood type, a certain DNA type?
I think there's something to do with the O negative, or at least the
Okay.
RH negative, because I know at least in when they, get a woman pregnant, and if they don't want the cross reaction of the blood of the baby and the mother, they would want, I think, two RH negatives to be produced together. Because if you're a RH negative and you have a positive, that's why you get the Rogram shot as a woman, right? If you're
Right.
pregnant, so the baby's blood doesn't interfere with your own and create problems either for the baby or you. Because I think a lot of women who've been used this way, well, for me, for example, I'm a RH negative, but you develop autoimmune issues later
Hmm.
in life, which could be caused by early pregnancies of RH negative, RH positive embryos. And by the way, when you're an abductee, they use you and they get you pregnant and they take it and they do this over and over again.
Yep. Yep.
So your body could have been introduced with a lot of things. But I think one of the things, if I remember correctly, I'm not a physician, but even in my own son, he was a O positive, and he was one of those when the baby is jaundiced, and then they
Yeah.
have to be treated with UV light for about a week. And in fact, my older sister had that, and she was a positive. My mom was a negative. So, and then sometimes you get premature births when the blood type is different, so that it doesn't keep reacting, causing problems. So I think
Gotcha.
there's a thing there, like if there's two different blood groups and they want to work with the negative, which is the universal donor, because there's not as many of those proteins on the red blood cell, that could create autoimmune issues.
That makes sense.
That's something that we've heard. But in terms of a prototype, I will say that with what Dr. Corrado Malanga of Italy has basically figured out, that all abductees, pretty much, if they're being taken with the history, they have a soul. And the
Yeah.
reason why the aliens take them is because they do have a soul. That means they have what he calls anima, or eternal spirit. That
Mm.
is like the battery that will operate their consciousness as a parasite through us, which is part of their agenda. So
Wow.
that's according to Malanga's, but I believe that it's very close to that, and that they'll take you from like 6 days of life. Some people think, oh, they took me when I was 2 or 3 or 4, the first abduction, and then again, as an early teen, and maybe many times as an adult, or gosh, into older age.
Yeah.
I believe they take you much younger, and that's what Malanga found. That once they take you, they usually take you within the first week of life if you are an abductee. So that's
Wow.
one thing that I believe, and that it's a study of mine, but it's just a speculation because I don't have the time, energy, money to do thorough research like a real researcher would do with college. But I believe that with the military abductions and MK Ultra related experiences,
Hmm.
where I'm going to call it the hierarchy system family connection, or the connection to royalty, or the connection to a Freemason bloodline from many generations, that might give you the propensity and the higher probability of being taken for certain kinds of projects. And I believe it is a spiritual permission, that there's like a contract through a blood oath in former ancestors that allowed that accessing to take place more easily. And
Okay.
you'll see this through alphabet soup agencies and military industrial complex corporations, and of course the Freemason and other secret society blood oath type of Luciferian umbrella groups. Then you will see that I think they have greater accessibility because of a spiritual permission that is allowed through that giving over of your downline. Like when someone takes a blood oath, oftentimes in some of these MK Ultra MyLabby projects, they find out later, well, my parents sold me.
Hmm.
They sold me to the CIA, or they were in a cult, or they did something, and they basically gave me over to a group. Or orphans, sometimes
Right.
orphans, they're also used because they're free for the taken a
Sure.
lot of times.
Yeah.
So those for more of the projects where you see a human connection
Hmm.
with a secret society blood oath ancestral curse going on, for lack of a better term.
Sure. That makes
But
sense.
as far as like the plain alien abductee, alien contactee, they may or may not fall into that umbrella of maybe why they're being taken. And it could be a number of reasons. It could be, genetic, it could be a soul thing, it could be the quotient of light energy they have, and it could be a number of things. And
So,
a
so
lot of times
yes.
we don't know. We were like many people, they're still perplexed. Why
Yeah.
me?
Why
Why
me? Right.
why do they keep doing it? And like even with Ted, they were still taking him, you know, and having experiences in what, his 80. So
Wow. I mean, that's insane.
yeah.
I mean, how does anybody just, withstand all that? With that in mind, I would love to, close with this thought. Is there anything, any of these people can do if they're being perpetually taken and experimented on and to stop it? Can they have some kind of spiritual protection or any other type of protection or something that will sever that, that continuous repetitive abuse by alien or military? Is there anything that you know of that they can do to stop it?
Well, I believe, and but not everybody may agree. But I believe, well, for me, it was a spiritual quest for connecting to the truth and then building on those spiritual faith and quality. And Jesus Christ was for me. But I will also say that, like a standard Buddhist meditation practice and many other things that I learned throughout my, seeking process, I think helped. It's kind of like gathering an original awareness of original self-awareness in the eternal quality of being.
Right.
And the more you imbue and build on that original awareness, it like builds your light and builds your power, especially if it's connected with what I don't know, you can call it with the will of God, with the will of Christ, Jesus. It gives you more power to offset and basically say no, cancel the contracts, cancel those curses. And there's ways that people claim that that has helped them, but I won't say that in 100%, because there are some people who are still taken in some of these 20 and back or more secret space programs where they're still being accessed, and they've done recovery work. They may have a different spiritual orientation, but they're still being taken, and they basically accept the fact that that's their reality. So I can't say for 100%, if it's only because, you have Jesus in your life, because there are some who lay claim to that, and they're just as manipulated, because I've seen this happen with Bible study groups that got torn apart by manipulation by the same beings, and they didn't see it coming.
Wow.
So just your spiritual power. And then Malanga actually created a recovery process to, recover our own spiritual coherence with our anima, mente, and espiritu in your body, which is really your mind, soul, spirit in the body, not dissociated. So you have to like heal the dissociation and the
Absolutely.
trauma and recover those
Yep.
soul parts that are being trapped, take out the parasites that are blocking the communication. And then once you get rid of them and you just keep building on how you create that quality of beingness, then the beings are kind of like narcissists. Pretty soon you're gray rocking them so much they just can't seem to hook in. And so I think it happens over time.
I
You
gotcha.
build this power over time.
So, in your experience, because I understand that you are embracing Jesus and that type of thought, right? Um, has have the abductions stopped for you, and how long has it been since that you know of the last one?
It's been about a year and a half since the last accessing.
Okay.
And so what I notice is, and I think this is some of the things we talk about in support groups, where we're just kind of sharing how we experience things on more and more subtle levels of awareness. So that maybe in the past it'd be like, oh, something physical happened. You had a body mark, you were sick, there was missing time, there was like the classic stuff. But as time goes on, you may only notice, wow, I had a dream hack, and something happened in the dream hack that was kind of like this medical thing, or they were interrogating me. So I think there's certain beings, and some of them may be human for all we know, that have a way of interdimensionally accessing our consciousness, even in the dream state. And they may do things to acquire information, or to, depending on their utilization of why they would want to access you. So I've
Mhm.
noticed that, where actually people basically dream hacked in my dream space. And then I sometimes realize it at the time, or discover later, oh my God, they just did this. And then I know that they're still accessing on a different level of consciousness, which really means that the more we recover our own self and our identity and work out whatever those traumas are, the more we recover greater awareness, so that we could perceive different levels of consciousness on how they're accessing. So it, you know,
That makes sense. Yeah. Good job. Yeah, I do a protocol of protection that, every night I shield myself. I protect myself. I protect my loved ones. I bring everybody into my circle, the ones that I want to protect. And I so there it's in several layers. And I can share that with you. I can maybe put a link in the description box so people can access that if they want to. But it's a whole protocol. And I remember at one point in time I was having a very lucid dream, and I was being taken to an underground base. It might have been Dulce or whatever, and the gray aliens were coming. I was just terrified to the point that my knees were buckling. And then I remembered what I do in the dream. I did it, and all of a sudden, that was it. That was it. Cut, and I was back. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and share that with everyone in the description box, at least how to access that, and I'll share that with you as well. And if it helps you, then awesome. One less to be taken up against their will. So, how would you love for people to be able to contact you if they want more information about your books or how to even get some counseling? How do they find you, Eve?
Actually, going through my website of evelorgen.com
Okay.
or alienlovebite.com and just go to the contact menu button. I've had a change in my theme of website where I'm actually unable to access things like I did before. And it was kind of a mistake, but it's still, I'd say go direct through the website or through my email at elorgen@gmail.com. I'm no longer on Facebook. I got locked out. So I'm like, I ain't going to go back on it. I was just so mad. I didn't want to go there. So really, social media is just my own Telegram group, but there's a link on my contact button on my website so that if you want to do that, there's a link, an invitation link. So I would just say email and website and Telegram is actually the best way now to contact me. And
Fantastic.
yeah,
Awesome, awesome. And audience, also, I invite you all to join shatteringthematrix.com. And it's again, all this type of content and solutions, right? Because I strongly believe that, our creator doesn't put us in any place or any type of situation where there isn't a solution, including our health. We can find our own type of healing with nature itself. So anyway, shatteringthematrix.com is a way where we can discuss all the things that are happening in the world, good, bad, and the ugly, and all the solutions to be able to escape the matrix. So, Eve, thank you so much for joining me again today. I know that part 3 will be coming as more things unfortunately unfold, but thank you again for joining us, and I hope to see you next week as well, or whenever you're on the show. I hope to see the audience next week.
sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good one.